Yeah, so my name is Jim Regetz. I'm actually a quantitative ecologist by training, although I've moved more into the computational side, and I'm on the computing staff at NC's, which is fitting. So as a computational ecologist, I've always been somebody who's worked with community. F5 to presentation. So I've always worked with other people's data in my research, and so it's fitting that I'm at NC's, where that is part of the mission of NC. So I can remember the next slide. Is there a presentation? Yeah. The F5 work? Oh yeah, look at that. Okay. So the scientific mission of NC's is to address big questions in ecology by fostering collaboration, so that's a huge part of it, among diverse experts, and integrating existing data. So we don't fund any new data collection. It's all about using existing data, and the premise is that there's a lot of information left in data that have been collected, analyzed, probably published on, maybe not, and sort of not thrown away, but after that point, no longer used. And so we talk a lot about the latent information content of data that's been used for something, but certainly not exhausted of all of that information. And we do this by funding a number of projects, but the working group model is the main one. So working groups are these collaborative groups of scientists who otherwise don't work together, often haven't even met each other, maybe have seen each other at conferences, know of each other's publications, but know they're all working on something similar. And by coming together, bringing together their data sets that they have worked with individually, perhaps bringing together data that they know of that people they've worked with have, they can start to answer some of these big questions. And so we discovered pretty early on, this started in the mid-90s, was that everyone always comes in expecting to get working right away, and they end up having to ask very basic questions, or answer very basic questions, like even who else is doing what in this area, what data sets are out there, where are they useful, how can I get them, can I get them, what do I do with them? So there's a big informatics challenge, and so accompanying our scientific mission, we have an informatics mission, which is to improve the community. So we think of our projects as the immediate clients, but really for the scientific community in general, increasing the capability to discover, access, interpret, and process data that are out there from distributed sources. So in terms of our support, we kind of operate in the middle of these three circles between collaboration, data and metadata, and analysis. And I don't want to kind of talk too much about all three, but I want to just give a flavor for some of the things we do in these areas. So on the data side, as I'm sure you all know, real-world data vary considerably in many ways, from just format, file formats, to structure, to the semantics, the meaning of the data. These are data that are collected for lots of different purposes, and so any one project, particularly one that answers big questions, is going to pull together very diverse data. So I just threw these images together by doing some Google image searching, but I could have put this together by taking images from slides we've already seen today and probably made even more diverse set of data sets. So how do we deal with this heterogeneity? Our approach has always been to let the data vary. So we don't try to do anything to make the data, there's no sort of putting a square peg through a round hole. We let the data vary, but we have formal metadata. So we have these very metadata-driven systems, and I think everyone today is familiar with the idea of metadata, is the descriptive information about data that is needed to assess and interpret it and to provide critical context. And particularly for other people's data, and also your own from maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago, having that descriptive information that allows you to do something useful with it. So what we help develop with the Long-Term Ecological Research Network and some other collaborators is something called the Ecological Metadata Language, EML. So it's a metadata standard that basically just means there are rules about how you express the information. It's developed by scientists for scientists, and I say that because there are other metadata standards, digital content metadata standards out there that aren't really very scientific focused. So there are more things in here for describing scientific data than in other metadata standards. And it's human readable but machine interpretable, which means that not only can you use it to read and learn something about data, but we can have software parse information out and do useful things with it. So as far as tools, there are a couple of ways of creating and working with this. So we provide all of the NC's participants access to to a web registry. So basically, as far as they're concerned, they just fill out a form. So it's actually creating metadata. It's creating the ML metadata behind the scenes, but it's just through a website where they fill out some information. They click upload, can upload data sets. There are mechanisms for for making things public or making things private. So there's some control. Those can be changed over time. So for example, we may have folks upload data while they're working on it and have it be private, restricted only to the working group, but then at the time of publication, they can make it available to anyone. We also have some software that we've created and are still working on. This is an open source, free, cross-platform application that basically is like the web form, but allows you to do more sophisticated things, more sophisticated searches and interacting with things that are out there on the network, and setting more, or creating more detailed metadata. And so I just had a few screenshots. Sorry. So this application. So it's just a similar thing. Instead of a form, it's a little wizard that allows you to enter this information about your data sets. You could actually just do it locally on your machine, but then you can upload it to this network. And then there are also ways of searching, as I said, and pulling down. So this is an example of a data set that is publicly available. And in this case, because it's just a CSV, it's parsed into this little table. So you actually look at the data there on the left and a description of columns on the right. So it immediately tells you things like what the codes that are in that column mean, which you probably wouldn't know figured out on your own otherwise. So when I'm talking about the network, that's something else we've helped to build up. So there is right now a pretty broad network of basically nodes that have data. They replicate back and forth, so there's some redundancy. We also provide some customized web pages. So we do have some different groups that have a more durable presence than our working groups, which tend to come and go. And so they have a very customized form that works for them. And there are a number of other features with this data network. So the other thing I want to talk about briefly is moving from data to analysis. So that was really all on the data sharing side. I think something that we've become more and more interested in is thinking about the analytical process as well. And there are, again, questions that come up with that. What exactly were the analytical steps, and something that was done and published on? What were the inputs and outputs? Can we reproduce and verify these? And so we've been thinking a lot about what we call scientific workflows, which is a pretty simple concept when it comes down to it. It's basically just the sequence of steps that goes from your input data to your output, to your results. And a lot of workflows are much more complex than this, but they're still, you can still sit down and write it down. And traditionally that's only been done in what comes out of the publication in a very crude way. And usually if you read through a paper and try to reproduce what they did, you fail because a lot of details are left out. So we are really thinking a lot about ways of doing this in a reproducible way. So another software example is something called Kepler that's been developed for a while. It's still improving. And it's basically a software environment for developing these workflows. So this is one that is just a screenshot of a workflow that involves searching for data that's on the network. And you really, if I were to demo it, you're just clicking and dragging little things over. It's sort of data cam that's pointing to this data set, and a little box that does a regression and a box that does a plot. And you can run this, you can save it as a file, you could just send it to somebody else, and if they have Kepler, they can rerun and get the exact same results. So there's some of that reproducibility that we're going for. And last slide, just to pull it all together. So I think this kind of states our vision, and traditionally, probably that publication is really the thing that most scientists care about. In a management context, maybe it's management recommendations or reports, but that is the output. That's what people go for. That's what we get credit for. And we really are trying to think about encapsulating that whole process from the initial discovery of information, the integration and analysis steps, and whatever's done to preserve it. So all of that is sort of packaged together, and that's the durable resource, the inputs, what was done to it, and the outputs all together in a way that can be examined, but also ideally reused in other contexts later.